My main thing that I do is, especially when I'm getting ready, I'm just not a music girly. I like just having a calming killer on in the background nearly, which sounds terrible.
July 2023, at that time I was obsessed with serial killers. Yeah, I watched about like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy.
Honestly, it's probably the most thing that I watch. I don't know, it's just something I always opt for. It's always like, I will enjoy it no matter what it is.
Dennis Nielsen, who else? The one I thought was the craziest was Richard Ramirez, was his name. Do you know him? Crazy.
So I will like get up in the morning, I'll have a shower and listen to a podcast sometimes when I'm doing my makeup, cleaning, working, in the car, going for a walk, before I go to sleep. There's no way that I'm not at some point in my day trying to listen to a podcast.
It would usually be like on my break at work.
I will stick one on and I could watch it for the whole day. Or if I'm going out, I like to play them when I'm getting ready, so doing my makeup and everything.
Hello and welcome to My Favorite Murder. That's Georgia Hart.
I'm Bailey Sarian, and today is Monday, which means it's murder, mystery, and makeup Monday.
Crime World's special investigation podcast based on my new book.
So like to put it in perspective, by the time our crime junkies finish this episode, approximately 4 women and girls will have lost their lives.
That's almost impossible.
Feel like this video might be too intense or triggering for you, I would recommend that you click out now.
Previously on Serial.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the show made by the crime junkie Ashley Flowers for those who are crime junkie AF.
And that's Karen Kilgara.
And we're here to podcast for you women and women lovers.
That's right, it's Women's History Month.
The way these women's bodies were found made it so obvious that
sometimes the person closest to you can become your worst enemy. This is the story of Lisbeth.
I'm Ella Anderson and welcome to Killer Queens, the female obsession with true crime. True crime as a genre of entertainment is by no means new. Whether it's the Truman Capote 1965 novel In Cold Blood or Karen and Georgia's hit podcast My Favorite Murder, humans have long been obsessed with these gruesome tales. And with the rise in true crime has come numerous think pieces about the ethics of violent crime as entertainment. But something I find just as interesting is the group of people that are entertained by it. A study in the US found that 84% of those aged over 13 are true crime consumers. The popularity of true crime is undoubtedly linked to the rise in podcasting. Jason Phipps, the BBC's first ever commissioner for podcasts, explained this more for me.
I sometimes describe myself as like the granddad of podcasting here in the UK. So we're talking around 2005, 2006. Most of us, not all of us, but let's say half of us were pretty disaffected radio producers. I think what we could see in this thing emerging, podcasting as it emerged, was this very powerful way of making audio that didn't have to sort of behave exactly as radio shows did. When I was in the BBC, there was a real moral dilemma, crisis, I think, with true crime. It wanted to do true crime, but it wanted to educate. So we came up with a podcast that sort of emulated a lot of the female-driven chatty podcasts that were really successful. Spotify put out a really brilliant report on true crime in 2018, 2019, part of their kind of, this is what's going on in podcasting on the platform. And if you looked at all the major genres, I mean, true crime is just like out there, you know, it's huge, mega genre. And then when they looked at the profile, the breakdown of the audience, it was like 80% female, young female. And we were in the BBC at the time, we were trying to, you know, target audiences through sounds and say, oh, why isn't there more younger women listening to BBC podcasts or BBC content? We came to the conclusion that true crime was a very good way of doing it.
70% of serial killer victims are female. And despite this, women are actually twice as likely as men to listen to true crime podcasts, all according to the Pew Research Centre. As Jason said, some podcasts, such as My Favorite Murder, have an 80% female listenership. Researchers have estimated that on average, 73% of true crime podcast fans are women. I sat down with the girls from the award-winning podcast Murder Most Irish to ask about this phenomenon.
Assuming that the majority of your audience is female,
yes,
and you've done live shows before, would you see that in the audience? That it's
yes,
yeah, we always say sorry to the men in the audience
because usually they're dragged by their partners.
Yeah,
we have a couple of men that do listen, but it is predominantly female, which I fully understand.
So why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it is because it's happening to us. I think, and if something's happening to you, you want to learn more about it. The cases that we would cover are women being attacked because they're women. So women want to know more about what's happening to them. Obviously I've been reading true crime since I was a kid, so way too young to be reading true crime, and I was always fascinated by it, and I've never kind of sat with it and thought, why am I so obsessed with this? But yeah, I think it is because we're women and because these things are happening to us. Maybe there's a slight aspect of it of like how to protect yourself, maybe a little bit, I don't know, or how to get out of those situations if something like that happens. But it's like anybody else, you read what's familiar to you, you write what you know, you read what you know. So for me personally, I think that's what it is.
Though what I couldn't understand was how could engaging with this media possibly soothe any fear that women feel, whether they're walking home at night or talking to strangers on the streets. Dr. Sarah Arnold, head of the Department of Media Studies at Maynooth University, explained this further for me.
In society, we live in a society that is violent against women, which it's fundamentally, for I suppose kind of all intents and purposes, it's sanctioned. Violence against women in our current society, in Western society, is sanctioned because the laws and the justice system that are meant to prohibit that, in fact, actually kind of aid criminality. So, for example, in the case of stalking, domestic abuse, even like contemporary kind of technological abuse of women, so kind of sexual assault by technology, in the case of rape, for example, and sexual assault, all of those are pretty much sanctioned by fact that there is very kind of few means by which they can be prosecuted. So for women, you live in a kind of society in which you're inherently under danger and vulnerabilized, and part of how you're trained is to figure out how to not get into that situation. You are the kind of person who's responsible for not having a crime committed against you. And so looking at the kind of mechanisms by which that happens and understanding society and the justice system and how violence happens becomes kind of part of the fascination about how do women operate in society. So it's no surprise that it's women who want to understand what happens, you know, in the murder of a woman, or what happens in kind of why is there violence against women, and particularly how does that violence occur and what are the circumstances in which it occurs. Because as we can kind of see from legal cases, that if a woman is perchance out walking, as has been recently the case in Ireland, and somebody kind of follows her and sexually assaults her, the woman is then kind of asked, why were you out that late? What were you wearing? What did you do to? So kind of understanding and kind of spending a lot of time kind of poring over that is kind of part of how women prepare to be in this world.
Some people I spoke to had other theories about why the true crime genre seems to be dominated not only by female audiences, but female content creators too.
Women are inherently storytellers. You know, we grow up telling each other everything. We tell each other our secrets. We tell each other terrible things that happened. Unfortunately, a lot of boys and men aren't socialised to do that. So then as we get older, we like hearing other women do it. We're like, that's a story that they've told. And if people are like, it's gossip. It's not gossip, it's storytelling. We want to know what's going on in your life. So when you sit down and listen to a podcast done by two women about women, it's perfect. You couldn't get anything better.
BBC's Jason Phipps actually believed that female content creators made better or more interesting podcasts.
I generally, this is a broad generalization, but I would definitely say overwhelmingly women-hosted podcasts are better. They're better. They just generally, why that is, I mean, I just generally think, they're very good conversations. I just think women are very good conversationalists. I hate to say it. No, I don't hate to say it. I love to say it, but I think that's a lot of it as well.
Dr. Arnold has some strong theories about why this might be.
You know, women are used to kind of seeing the world in multiple perspectives, you know, in those kind of dominant perspective as well as kind of the minoritized perspective. And so, whereas kind of men understanding female victimhood is the big ask. Like, why would they, in society, men are not kind of brought up and reared to understand the position of the other. They're kind of there to assert dominance and to kind of maintain that as a position. So it's much harder for them to empathize with another category of people. Whereas kind of for women, they understand women, obviously, but they also understand men, so they can kind of shift those perspectives, understand the kind of perspective of victimhood.
We can't just ask ourselves why women like true crime, because the inverse of this question is almost just as interesting. Why do men not like it?
It also doesn't paint them in a great fucking light. Like men don't come off well in this industry.
No, not at all.
At all.
They're being told what they've done and what has previously been done, and they can't argue it, and it really, really bothers them.
And I think that plays into its demise.
I think if you look at them, a lot of the killers are men, and probably having to come to terms with like another man did this to a woman. Probably having to come to terms with that is probably a bit scary, and then there might be like a bit of denial in there.
They don't want to have to think that their friends are doing this. If every woman has a story of violence against them from a man, then there's men that do it. And they don't want to have to face up to that. Probably as well, like men who don't treat women badly don't want to hear about women being treated badly. I'd like to think there are good men who are like, I'm uncomfortable because I don't want this to be happening, but it is uncomfortable to watch and listen to and hear about.
I love that we sound like the two angriest feminists on the planet right now. Men, boo!
It's true that almost all of the perpetrators in these popular true crime cases are men. Naturally, we don't like seeing our gender represented as being capable of these heinous things, especially when we would never engage in anything like that ourselves. I can see why men maybe shy away from this content. But what if we broaden our definition of true crime? Not every story has a creepy murderer and an innocent perfect victim. What about organised crime? Gang leaders, kingpins, men with power and influence? Clodagh Meaney, a journalist at Crime World, a podcast that covers a lot of gangland issues in Ireland, experiences a completely different demographic.
Our percentage of women that listen to Crime World is somewhere, I'd say, in the 20-30%. We have a huge male audience, and the reason being is that we cover a lot of gangland crime, and for some reason I think there's a difference in the content true crime women listen to and the true crime men listen to. Men seem to enjoy the gangland stuff. They like The Godfather and Goodfellas and that sort of, and I don't know if it's because, and people have theorized before, and I don't know if it's true, because but people have theorized that men enjoy that side of it because they can imagine themselves as the Don, or they can imagine themselves in that power role, whereas the woman imagines herself in the role of the victim, and oh my god, what can I do if I was in that situation?
In Louise Wattis's book, True Crime, Gender and Criminology, she calls this gang leader figure the hard man.
Men are interested in hearing about men who are good at violence, what I've called gangsters, hard men connected to organised crime, not necessarily criminals. These podcasts will also feature guests who are, proficient in combat sports. MMA is a massive thing now. I guess, we kind of condemn criminals in society, but we also glorify and celebrate them and regard them as cool. And there's some sort of kudos kind of attached to that gangster figure, to some extent. To some would be perceived as the successful male, the alpha male. And it is, for some men, I think, it's presenting a masculine ideal. Not all, by any and I wouldn't want to make any massive generalizations about that, but if we talk about things like hegemonic masculinity, the type of masculinity that is valued in some quarters, it would be in the figure of those men. You just have to realise how diverse the genre is and how many different subgenres fall within true crime, and you just see.
It is disingenuous to paint the entirety of true crime audiences as predominantly female. But it is true that women are far more attracted to these murder narratives. And for the longest time, I was one of those women. I started listening on and off to a true crime podcast in my spare time. But what started as a casual interest grew to be an obsession. I was watching TikToks, YouTube videos, Netflix documentaries of serial killers and cultists. And if I wasn't watching, I was listening. The more depraved and psychotic it all seemed, the more I was interested. It all came to a head when one night I was walking home alone from a house party, in the middle of Ballymun for all those Dubliners. My mind was running through these hundreds of cases that I had heard and watched. I could think of at least 20 that started just like this. A girl walking home alone at night. The fear that I felt I couldn't describe. It's not the only time I've ever walked home alone, but now I was convinced that I would be one of these famous stories. That people would bring up my name on podcasts and TikToks and Netflix documentaries. And that's when I knew I had to distance myself from this content. And I'm not the only girl who has fallen into this way of thinking.
It does get a little creepy at times. I found myself like not trusting everyone. I'm like, okay, maybe I should stop weeing back about the true crime. Everyone's not out to murder you.
There's some of them where it's just the cases themselves are like, wow, this person was literally just like walking down the street and then they got murdered, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm walking down the street right now. I think it does have that factor of making you feel paranoid. It's kind of inevitable if you're listening to a lot of stuff like that. That's why I do not watch it before bed, because then I will go to sleep and I'll be like, someone will kill me in the night.
There was one specific case where a girl got raped by someone in her neighbourhood because he believed that her stripping and getting undressed and dressed, he believed that was her inviting him to rape her, that she was asking for it. And as someone who literally is so lazy, and sometimes I'm doing it, and when I'm home alone I'm like, oh my god, if someone broke in right now, they could literally rape me, and I'm asking for it because that happened to that girl that time.
All of our extracurricular time now is doing this. So you're not absorbing anything else. You're doing this and this alone, and all of the other things that you maybe would have done previously kind of take a backseat. So I think for me in particular, my faith in like individual men around me definitely changed, and I found my relationship shift with them. I found that really difficult, and I found myself really angry with them. And so I would be like, oh, I need to take a break. The other thing is, I have a kid, I have a little girl, and when we started to do it, we had cases where Emma would talk about kids and they would really upset me and affect me. And the other thing is, when you're actually doing the cases, like we've been on the podcast and we've cried.
Yeah, it's hard.
And then you're at the end of it because you want to leave with some levity almost, and it's really difficult. We then have to go home.
In reality, the majority of violence against women is perpetrated by someone you know, your partner, your family, or your friends. Only 10% of female murder victims are actually killed by strangers. But that's not what the majority of true crime cases display. Dr. Arnold told me about how this framing might negatively affect our perception of violence against women in society.
I think it can, in the sense that like we can kind of see that the proportion at which it happens in, for example, true crime drama, we're looking at something like television drama. If you're looking at crime drama more generally, you would get the impression that if you were to look at that as the world and all the crime that's committed within it, you would think that disproportionately women are killed in their own kind of small communities on an everyday basis. So it does create an elevated sense of threat, that's kind of not necessarily in line with the material reality of how many, for example, assaults there are against women. And actually it kind of misrepresents the type of crimes that are committed against women. So, for example, you don't see domestic violence represented as much, even though that's predominantly one of the kind of main forms of violence that's enacted against women. What you do see are the kind of more extreme, more fearful, more kind of out there types of murders. So that kind of stranger, random stranger who kind of picks out and stalks and murders a woman, rather than the kind of actual everyday reality of violence against women. Yeah. So I think it does kind of create a sense of threat against the things that are least likely to happen, and not against the things that are actually likely to happen.
There's this kind of idea that a lot of girls have in the true crime community, that the more you listen, the better you'll be at recognizing when it happens to you. The better you might even be at fighting back.
I think like subconsciously it shows me how to be wary of especially situations where I could be hurt and where I could be vulnerable. It's not obviously why I'm interested in it. It's not something that pops into my head first, like I'm going to watch this documentary so I can protect myself on my own. But it's kind of like you learn a lot, especially how to protect yourself.
One of the reasons I do like it is kind of the like advantage of having knowledge of like this is a common thing done. Maybe not overcautious, but definitely like the right amount of cautious. It's just kind of recognizing things that are creepy and
recognizing I probably wouldn't have been aware as much of like how much violence there is against women.
Kind of like desire to be able to escape from situations or like acknowledge situations just in case something does happen. I think content like this, it's obviously it's not a tutorial on how to escape a killer, but like it shows that it's possible and stuff like that. I'm a very anxious person. I feel like if I was involved in something like this, my anxiety would take over and I wouldn't be able to like use any of the like skills I've used. But also I feel like it has trained me to know like if something's happening, here's different things I can do.
The biggest takeaway that a lot of these women had was to be more careful of who they show their empathy for, to be assertive in these scary situations rather than polite.
What have you learned to kind of protect yourself?
Definitely to be wary of my compassion as a woman.
I think the one thing it has taught women is to stop being so polite.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing I took away from it.
Yeah.
Like, no means no, and that bit of like when it feels sus, I probably as younger would have given it a bit more time.
Yeah.
And leaned
you can
into
kind
it
of
a bit
gauge
more.
it, can't you?
Whereas now, definitely, I'm less polite. I don't really feel like I need to give anybody my time, and I don't feel like if I think something's suspect or I'm uncomfortable with it, that I am going to lean in and be quiet and meek. I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned from it, that I've taken from doing it.
You know how Ted Bundy would lure women to... He'd like go in with a broken arm and he'd be like, hey, I need help. And it'd be always women who would be like, oh, they'd kind of feel for him, and then they'd go to the back of his car and then things would happen and they'd get kidnapped that way. I think that's the first time where I've realised that my compassion or my kindness could get me into trouble. And I think it's made me not worry but aware of it, or like how it can be used against you.
From my interviews, it is easy to draw the conclusion that consumption of true crime media negatively affects women's mental health. However, this is not necessarily true. Dr. Darragh McCashin explains why psychologists don't always believe that violent media can cause an increase in paranoia and negative emotions.
From my understanding, and this has been true of violent video games, through to screen time, through to gaming, movies, radio, the typical cycle starts off as one like a moral panic. Such and such is burning our brains, such and such is causally impacting this behaviour, this outcome. My understanding of the best of the evidence from the likes of the Oxford Internet Institute, for example, is there is no causal connection. Often we get the research question framed in the wrong way at the outset. So rather than what is this type of true crime doing to this behaviour, certainly as psychologists we go behind that all the more. We go, what's the motivation for that person to engage in this in the first place, or what is that therefore supplanting? So for example, if I am all of a sudden rejecting my social network, I'm late to my job because I am up all night listening to true crime or watching true crime or going down rabbit holes of whatever, and the reason I'm doing that is perhaps something to do with loneliness, self-worth, or I've been taken in by a conspiracy theory, or I'm having trouble at home, or there's trauma, there's substance abuse. They're probably more important to critically understand rather than trying to ask the question, does X consumption of this media predict Y outcome?
Though after all of these interviews I've conducted, I would be amiss not to include this one thing. In almost every conversation I've had with these women, they all brought up feeling a sense of camaraderie, a sisterhood.
You know, you have these own thoughts, especially when you consume so much of it, that like, oh, is there something wrong with me? Or if it's like, I wonder if, you know, I secretly want to do these things or something. Whereas I think when you talk to people about it and they share the same thoughts as you kind of feel more like at ease with that. I suppose it's comforting in that way. And it's also comforting in, again, sharing it with a fellow woman. Like, this is what happened. And they're like, yeah, no, it's awful. And they share the same emotions that you feel about it. Because I know women are a more emotional, you know, species. So I feel like it kind of, you need to get it out to somebody when you watch it.
Even content creators see the importance of having someone to lean on as they constantly engage with these violent crimes.
When I record with Sarah, I love doing it.
Yeah.
So if I'm feeling a certain way and then I sit down with Sarah and we record, my spirits, even though it's terrible, and my spirits aren't lifted because of the case, my spirits are lifted because I am talking with my friend. So I'm kind of hopeful that maybe is what other people are feeling as well. Even though we're talking about something terrible, we're talking to each other. You lean on each other, so that does help with the mental health thing. Sometimes just being like, do you want to come over and record will lift my day.
One of my friends from back home, anytime anything happens, we are voice noting each other. So I have like this one or two go-to friends that I wouldn't see all that often, and we would, be like, oh my god, did you see the update in this? Or oh my god, did you see this is happening? Whether it's a documentary or it's something that's happened in the news, we definitely have those friends that I go to for a chat. Like the John Benet Ramsey, when that came out, we were like straight onto each other, just being like, oh my god, all this new information, and trying to bounce our theories around, and are you sure you think it was Brooke? Are you sure? No, maybe think it was the dad. So definitely have those friends.
It is a terrifying piece of knowledge that if someone was to choose me or another woman as the victim of one of these heinous acts, that there is almost nothing I can do. The chances of me being able to fight back or outsmart them is just so low. Being able to engage with this fear that almost all women have and to talk about it, even if we're just sharing our favourite stories or theorising on unsolved cases, there's a sort of comfort that comes with that. To frame true crime as this deplorable and dark genre that twists the minds of its listeners, inciting fear and paranoia, is just wrong and slightly catastrophising. It's a way for women to engage with this fear, to hold autonomy over their paranoia, to share with their friends and lean on each other. Humans have always found an interest in the dark and macabre, and will continue to do so for years to come. Look at the audience for gangland content, or the audience for violent video games. Most people choose to engage with the darker side of humanity in some form of media. So, what does this all mean? What do we take away from the true crime phenomenon and its impact on women's perception of the world around them? Statistically, in many parts of the world, including Ireland, violent crime is lower than it was decades ago. But that's not how it feels. For many women, the stories we consume create a heightened sense of paranoia, a belief that the most unlikely of crimes are just waiting around the corner. But does this mean true crime is harmful? Well, not necessarily. As Dr. McCashin said, psychological research tells us that consuming dark media, whether it's horror movies, crime stories, or even disaster films, is not inherently damaging. We seek out these narratives for a reason. It's really no different to my brother playing Call of Duty for 5 hours a day, or my mum watching the same gruesome Scandinavian detective programme. Maybe it's a controlled way to confront fear, or a way to feel prepared, or maybe it's just a gripping form of entertainment, and I'd say for most people it's a mixture of all three. Whatever the reason, the responsibility doesn't only fall on the media itself, but on why we're engaging with it. So if true crime makes us feel more afraid and more anxious, like a lot of the women I spoke to does, what do we do? Well, first is awareness. Understanding that the stories we consume are not reflective of daily reality. Just as we know a horror movie to be fiction, we need to remind ourselves that a gruesome crime story is an isolated event, and not an imminent or likely threat. And second is conversation. The girls I spoke to found a huge comfort in sharing their opinions and theories with other women. Reaching out to each other and engaging with a fear that most women have can be an excellent way to deal with and manage paranoia. True crime content is not always the villain. It's a lens, one that reveals both the darkness of the world and our deep human curiosity about it. The key is not to stop watching, listening, or reading, but to engage with it consciously. Because in the end, it's not about what we consume, it's about why we're consuming it.